So, I'm sitting in the passenger side when the police officer flashes his flashlight from my friend's face to mine and says, "Everybody get out of the car." At this moment, I could hear the Southwest tagline, "Wanna get away?" I've never been too far from the reset button. To me, restarts represent a newfound focus. It's addition by subtraction. On my path to becoming a creative professional, I've been through a lot of things as a creative individual. So my first semester out of high school was spent in Columbia, Missouri. Let's just say I wasn't too focused on my academics. It's not that it was hard, I just didn't care. Recognizing that I wasn't in it, I dropped out. Now get this, I told my mom I wanted to be a rapper and her head almost exploded. Makes sense. Imagine your kid has undergrad all but paid for with academic scholarships, but he thinks he's the next Jay-Z. I'd want to slap him too. Regardless, I had to hit the restart button. I worked as a receptionist, a golf caddy, and a shoe salesman during my time off from school. I was making music and money every single day and growing creatively. Clearly, I was where I needed to be. Well, that summer, I witnessed my best friend get arrested for intravenous drug abuse while we were driving back to Omaha from a road trip to California. Clearly, I wasn't where I needed to be. I needed to go back to school. So I thought to myself, what do I want to do and where will I be in a position to be, the most successful? I have family on the south side of Chicago, and I know that there's a school in the South Loop for liberal arts. You know Kanye's first album, College Dropout? Same school. So here I am hitting the restart button again. I started taking classes in audio engineering, but I graduated with a degree in music business management. I figured it would give me more opportunities when I graduated. So in my last semester of school, I started interning with a company that synchronized independent artist music to television and advertisements. I went from interning with the publishing team to then heading the A&R department in less than a year. Basically, I was going to be taking over the world by springtime. But life came at me fast, and things at music dealers moved south even faster. I could foresee a catastrophic conclusion to my first job experience. Somebody passed me the restart button. Moving back to Omaha was humbling, to say the least. I knew that it was the right move to recenter my focus, but at the time I didn't really know why. About 6 months after moving back, music dealers closed business, everybody was laid off. It's not uncommon to feel out of place when you change environments. Uprooting yourself, it's not easy, and adaptation is an inevitable obstacle. I spent a lot of time reflecting where I'd been and ultimately where I wanted to be. Omaha has sparked this creative revival in me that I don't think I would have been able to cultivate in an otherwise noisy environment. I've been able to freelance voiceover services on the other side of the world. I've written 2 children's stories, and I'm more confident in my music than I've ever been. Sometimes we need to stop and take a step back before we can take the right step forward. I wouldn't be where I am today without the restart button. And honestly, I don't think anybody has it all figured out. Nobody can see everything in front of them. But if we take the time to take a step back, maybe we'll be able to widen the lens. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so my restart story kind of begins with a change of mentality. When I realized that I was making decisions based on fear, I also noticed how many opportunities I was missing. Whether my fear was the unknown or being judged, I changed my perspective, and this really changed everything for me. There's this amazing speech on YouTube, which you should find, by Jim Carrey, and he kind of summed up how I was feeling at the time. And I think he addresses something a lot of people don't realize, and that's we don't think that we're afraid, we think we're being practical or we're being realistic. Hindsight's 20/20, but I think that looking back is really important for identifying what isn't serving you. And for me, this practicality mentality was not serving me, and I didn't have the life that I wanted. So when I changed my mentality, so did my life. For me, the opposite of fear felt a lot like freedom, and I noticed that with every opportunity I had to choose a safe path, I had an equal opportunity to choose this freedom mentality. This is all really to preface my restart moment, because after 20 years as a dancer, I was really burnt out from this pressure to be perfect, but I was freaking out because I had no idea what else I could do. I had a choice to be complacent and stay on this path that I knew, or make a change and embrace my curiosity, so I quit. But I had no compass for navigating this new freedom, and I gave myself real anxiety trying to figure it all out and control it. And in the middle of a panic attack, I gave my life to God, and I decided to trust His plan for my life instead of my own. And within 6 months, I met my future husband, and I was given a job offer in Florida. With this renewed mindset, I had a huge hunger to try everything new, but this idea of perfection was still deeply ingrained in me, and I needed to let that go to really embrace this new future. And I had a huge adventure coming up in front of me, because around the time my husband proposed, he was also offered an opportunity in Michigan. So that meant we were going to go from Florida to Nebraska to Michigan, and it was going to be all out of my control. So I had to just test my faith, and the time I went to put in my 2 weeks notice, my employer offered me a 2-month severance package because they had to downsize. So it was really really big blessing. But as you know, business isn't cheap, and Ben and I decided that we wanted to pay off our debt. So after 2 years of living like minimalists and sacrificing some comforts, we were debt-free, and now we're self-funded business owners getting comments like, "You must be trust fund babies." By taking advantage of the right financial tools, we've been able to travel places all over the world, but this wasn't without giving up other fears, because the news and our family had these huge concerns about places we were going, but none of which we actually experienced. For the first time, I had this hunger for something new, which is why I started Freely Me, my blog. And I was sharing photos and these stories that I was experiencing, and people were responding. And it was around this time I was rejected from graduate school, so I decided to dive into freelancing full time. I had never been self-employed before, and I'm surrounded by all these amazing creatives, and it made me kind of wonder if I was good enough to do this. But instead of focusing on those fears, I chose to focus on what I knew. And so I started an event company, I wrote about travel, and I took photos of Ben and his friends. But still, after 2 years of a lot of crazy ups and downs, especially financially, I was wondering if it was all worth it, but I couldn't quit because it was hard. That would just make me feel like a fraud. So I prayed about it, and I logged into my LinkedIn account where I had this message from a startup in Kansas City looking for a freelance writer, and I've been writing for them for 2 years. If my restart story tells me anything, it's that there's freedom in letting go. When I restarted my thinking and I stopped being afraid of making mistakes, discomfort, or the unknown, I was really able to pursue my creative passions and experiences without limitation. Thanks.
All right, when I first moved to Omaha, I signed up for my first half marathon. I'd lace up my shoes and head out into the cold December mornings, and then I'd start crying within a block and have to go home. I really hate running, but honestly not that much. Moving back to Nebraska was not the story I wrote for myself, but one that felt written for me without my permission. I left behind some personal trauma and headed back to my home state to heal. So I signed up for the half to have a goal to achieve, and instead I felt lost, unsuccessful, and alone. Have you ever felt that way? A loss of a loved one, unemployment, that kind of monumental shift in your everyday, a piece of your core identity gone missing. The kind of changes that make you ask, did I do something that caused this? Did I deserve this? I spent a lot of my 20s moving. I would feel so special when I would tell somebody I was going to grad school in Boston or I was living in LA. This was my entire self-perception. Moving meant I was successful and that I was one of the ambitious people that left my hometown, which of course meant everything came crashing down when I had to move back at 30. My story switched from that romantic comedy version of myself living in apartments near subway stops to being in a city that people would tell me was a great place to settle down. Had I screwed up somewhere? Why couldn't I handle it somewhere else? I don't want to settle down. Why am I here? Every time I would go for a run, I would circle around in my pain to find answers. Social psychologist James Pennebecker discovered that there are questions that people ask themselves after a crisis. Did I deserve this? Did I do something wrong? And could I have fixed this? Does that sound familiar? These I questions are at the center of how people handle crisis. Putting yourself at the center of crisis makes you think that the crisis is actually about you. To put it another way, you're personalizing it. This contributes to you feeling stuck in the pain, and you're unable to think of who you could be in the new narrative. So do you change your story, or do you continue the old one even though the facts don't fit? The truth is, we all have a narrative that we've created for ourselves. Sometimes editing when you have to, but you have a core storyline that you want to stick with. Maybe yours is you're married, you're going to have kids, you're going to move to that country. But maybe your story turned out that you're divorced, you can't have kids, and you're in the suburbs. That can all feel really personal, but it turns out your mom was right. Life happens. When people cope with crisis well, they understand that. It's not about you, it's just the situation. But switching perspective on how personal it can feel requires detachment. You're the author, not the character. A few years ago, I was feeling pretty scorned by somebody, and I had convinced myself they were orchestrating this elaborate plan to prove me wrong. A friend of mine pointed out that it would take a lot of intention to put me at the center of their actions, and I was like, yeah, this guy's a really big jerk. But that kind of reasoning is exactly why you can't recover from crisis. You're focusing on how individual the pain feels. You spin in circles and you can't get it out of your head. To truly shake up your routine, you need to work through the shift and take yourself out of the reasonings. For me, returning home was fraught with a very personal failure I thought others saw in me and I saw in myself. The identity crisis I went through was tied to a million points of frustration about how out of control I felt about the outcomes, but I had to take control of the narrative. Invisibilia recently did a story on loss, and I think they said it best. You have to take the pieces of your life that exist and rearrange them in a new way that puts the ghost in the background, in a way that matches the facts and lets you find a new place to stand in the world you're actually living in. So I became the author of my own story. I took a true inventory of the way my life was moving forward and not just the surroundings. My Nebraska story is full of best friends, the love of my life, being closer to my family, and a great job. It's the best chapter I've written so far.